Greetings, guest. Welcome to the Patriarchy, where we explore cinema classics fueled by predictive Hollywood programming and unpack how our favorite characters in cinema got egg all over their faces. I am your commentator, Dom, and tonight we're unpacking the love story of Bridget Jones. The Bridget Jones franchise is a romantic comedy that first debuted in theaters in 2001, with subsequent sequels released in 2004 and 2016, based on the novel of the same name written by Helen Fielding and stars Renee Zellweger as Bridget Jones and her love interests, Colin Firth as Mark Darcy, Hugh Grant as Daniel Cleaver, and Patrick Dempsey as Jack Kwan. Instead of focusing on one film, I thought it would be much more interesting to spread our analysis across all three installments of the Bridget Jones franchise, which include Bridget Jones's Diary, Bridget Jones: The Edge of Reason, and Bridget Jones's Baby. These films chronicle the life of a middle-aged woman still trying to figure out and find love, often finding herself in never-ending cycles of chronic singleness, meaningless hookups, and love triangles. Let's examine Bridget, her decades-long quest to curating her happy ending, and why, in the end, her story is the exception, not the rule, when it comes to her particular picture-perfect outcome. Let's start at the end, in Bridget Jones's Baby. The movie closes with a 44-year-old Bridget and her decades-long love interest, twice divorced Mark Darcy, being happily wed and walking off into newlywed bliss with their newborn baby, and Bridget happy and smug to be Mark's third wife. But how did she get here? Well, jumping back to the beginning, the audience first meets Bridget at 32 years old in 2001's Bridget Jones's Diary. Bridget is younger and can be described as a bit of a free spirit. Some might say that she's a bit of a mess, but nevertheless witty, a bit self-conscious, hyper-aware of her poor mating decisions in the past, and determined to change the trajectory of her love life.
Not continue to form romantic attachments to any of the following: alcoholics, workaholics, commitment phobics, peeping toms, megalomaniacs, emotional fuckwits, or perverts.
The man who 12 years later would become Bridget Jones's husband, Mark Darcy, is a childhood acquaintance of Bridget, who she finds herself acquainted with again at her mother's annual holiday party. Although this second first impression isn't a good one, neither of them are keen on each other, Mark referring to Bridget as a, quote, spinster who smokes like a chimney and drinks like a fish, and Bridget to Mark as rude, unpleasant, and dull as stated in her diary. Yet somehow Mark garners affection for Bridget not too long after their initial reintroduction as adults. Why? My thoughts are the competition of another male gaze, and not just any male gaze, but the gaze of his former friend, Daniel, who's also Bridget's boss, who he fell out with over an affair with his ex-wife. But I firmly believe that it didn't have to be Daniel, it could have been any man. See, Bridget, although trying to get it together, is still making bad decisions with men. This is blatantly clear in the sexually inappropriate relationship that she willingly participates in with her boss, Daniel, who is not only her boss, but also known as a playboy who ends up cheating on her. And I use the term cheating loosely here, as Daniel and Bridget really don't seem to be in an official relationship. It's more like a situationship. One thing about Bridget that the audience can admire is that she's always authentic. This is why her character is so popular, because this is the portrayal of a woman who isn't afraid to be and show up as herself, flaws and all. That's how she showed up at her mother's party when her and Mark first meet again, yet he was borderline repulsed by her then.
Mother, I do not need a blind date, particularly not with some verbally incontinent spinster who smokes like a chimney, drinks like a fish, and dresses like her mother.
Yummy.
But when Mark sees the carefree interactions between Bridget and Playboy boss Daniel on holiday, and that she's captured the attention of the ladies' man who can be carefree and silly with her, this is when the audience sees Mark seeing her differently. Let's put a pin in this thought, as this theme will arise later in the sequel. And this begins the chain of events that would lead to a decades-long pursuit full of breakups, pregnancy scares, a failed multi-year engagement, and subsequently 12 years later, Bridget finally becoming Mark's third wife. But why is Mark's heart softening for Bridget at this particular moment? Let's understand a bit further who Mark is to gain some insight. Upon first meeting Mark, the audience sees that he is a very serious man. He's a lawyer and contrarily a man of few words, yet when he speaks, his words are sharp and concise. Quite the opposite of bubbly and carefree Bridget, who is often full of banter and really doesn't take herself too seriously, neither in her personal life or at work. We can see the moment that Mark's heart begins to soften for Bridget in the canoe with Natasha, who is a striking contrast to Bridget and very similar to Mark. Perhaps at this point, Mark realizes that he doesn't need someone who mirrors him, but someone who is completely different. But again, this actualization doesn't become known to Mark until 1, he witnesses another man's acceptance of Bridget's quirky and lighthearted demeanor, and 2, he can easily and rather directly compare the serious and duplicative nature of the woman he's in the canoe with, Natasha, juxtaposed to Bridget's carefree and silly personality. Mark eventually communicates this to Bridget as, "I like you very much, just as you are," and Bridget hangs on to these words with vigor. Let's highlight here that Mark isn't just saying words. Throughout the 3 released films, we do see him show up for Bridget time and time again. But why did it take 12 years to get down the aisle? Because Bridget does what a lot of women do, and that's hold on and hold out for what's familiar to them. In her later years, Bridget even confessed that in the end, she felt that he, referring to Mark Darcy, was never there and she was always alone, which isn't hard to combat given Mark's cold, icy, and stoic demeanor. But why would she want to be in a relationship like this? Even when after 12 years of pining over Mark, she had the opportunity to move on with Jack Kwan, who is a man that she had a fling with at a music festival, she still chose Mark. But let's talk about Jack for a bit. Jack is introduced in Bridget Jones's Baby as the potential baby daddy of Bridget's unborn child, as she slept with Jack around the same time that she slept with Mark, thwarting herself yet again into another love triangle between 2 men. Even though Mark was happy to hear that Bridget was pregnant and it could possibly be his child, he really didn't spark up and go all in for Bridget and show some emotion until he saw the threat of another man caring for her and making her happy, Jack Kwan. Does this scenario ring familiar? This theme is presented in the first film when Mark doesn't warm up to Bridget until he sees her with Daniel. And Jack Kwan, by the way, couldn't have been written and portrayed as anything less than perfect. Jack is 1, extremely handsome, 2, a mogul billionaire, 3, attracted to Bridget on sight, flaws and all, 4, turns out to be incredibly sweet, much more positive, and much more present and attentive to Bridget. Yet, she still chooses the cold shoulder of Mark Darcy to lean on, who, by the way, was also coming fresh out of his second marriage and likely wasn't fully healed from that relationship. It's undeniable that Mark cares for her, but is Mark Darcy capable of consistently showing his love for her the way that she needs him to? I know they say opposites attract, but in this case, familiarity with Mark is what leads Bridget's decision-making, in my humble opinion. I'll end with this, that Bridget Jones, ending up with a newborn, happily married to a man who's twice divorced, that she's been on and off with for 12 years, is an exception, not a rule, as there are many women who stay in decades-long relationships and never receive the level of commitment that they desire. That is not the way to achieve that goal. Knowing when to move on is, and Bridget never knew how or when to move on from Mark. And that's understandable, as we as humans have a habit of sticking with what's familiar to us, opposed to what may be better for us. Do we think that Bridget chose what's better or just what was familiar? What are your thoughts? And is Mark Darcy really her person, or was he just the person who happened to be around the longest? Share your thoughts below, and as always, if you've enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Signing off now, your friend, Dom.